30, and I am calling the meeting to order. First, we will take a roll of the committee members who are present to establish a quorum. Pamela, if you could take the roll call, please. Here. Present.
Pamela Brief, present. Susan Landry. Present. Tricia Traub.
Present.
All right, thank you very much. This meeting is being webcast. Participants watching the webcast will only be able to observe the meeting. Anyone interested in participating in the meeting must join the WebEx meeting, and the information and instructions in order to do that are attached to the meeting agenda and available on the LATC website. After each one of the agenda items today, there will be an opportunity for public comment. I would like to acknowledge Ron Jones, who unfortunately was not able to be here in person, but we appreciate his attendance at the meeting virtually. As far as any voting on that is done today, all motions and seconds will be repeated for the record, and votes on all motions will be taken by a roll call vote. We will probably take a break from the meeting for a short lunch break sometime around 11:30 to noon, depending on where we are in the agenda at that point in time. Also, I'd like to take this opportunity to thank Trish Rodriguez, the former program manager, who unfortunately has, unless for her, retired recently. I cannot thank Trish enough for everything that she's done for the committee. Everything that she's done has been very professional, and I've personally considered her a mentor and a valuable friend, and just want to say that she will sorely be missed. So at this time, I'd like to open up if any of the members have comments that they would like to make before we get into the rest of the agenda. All right, Susan?
Yeah, I just would also like to thank Trish. I did see her as a mentor and more than just a colleague, but a friend in a lot of ways. And she made a lot of contributions to this committee, and I just want to really acknowledge her time serving with us and wish her well in her retirement.
Mm-hmm. Thanks. Hearing no other comments, we will move on to any public comments. And so at this point in time, I will open it up for public comments. We'll remind everyone that any specific items that are brought up will not be able to be addressed at this time by the committee, but will be placed as an agenda item on a future meeting if so necessary. So at this point in time, I will open it up to anyone who's interested in making a public comment. Do we have any way of knowing how many people are attending via WebEx right now?
This is the moderator. We have a handful of people on WebEx. I cannot tell who you have in person. It would be very helpful to me if you would announce first WebEx or the room and then the other.
All right. Well, we're not receiving any questions here in the room, so is there any coming in from the WebEx?
We are now accepting public comment via WebEx. If you would like to make a comment, instructions are on the screen. Please type the word comment into the Q&A box in the lower right-hand corner of the screen and send that comment to all participants. Dial-in users, please dial *3 to raise your hand, and we will call on people in the order we have requests. We're going to take about 15 seconds now to see if we have a request for public comment. Seeing no request for public comment, do you wish to return to the agenda?
Yes, please, and thank you. All right, we will move on to item D, update from the Department of Consumer Affairs, and we have Melissa Geer with us today to make the presentation.
Hello. Can you hear me? Excuse me. Hello and good morning, Chair Roshinsky, Vice Chair Brief, Executive Officer Zuniga, and members of the committee. I'm Melissa Geer, Deputy Director for Board and Bureau Relations, and I appreciate the opportunity to provide the Department of Consumer Affairs update this morning. I have several updates that I will share with you this morning, starting with a DEI update. Established last fall, the department's DEI Steering Committee is comprised of 12 executive leaders from the boards, bureaus, and department, and has been working on many items, including updating the strategic planning process, training, and development of an informational DEI fact sheet, which was distributed to board leadership. I am pleased to report on the progress of the committee's efforts to date. The strategic planning process has been updated to embed DEI into the process, which includes a survey, DEI section in the environmental scan, video messages, and brief training video. This month, DCA's Solid team began reaching out to executive officers to develop or update new strategic plans. In addition, all DCA Solid trainers will complete a 50-hour diversity, equity, and inclusion training certification program through the University of Massachusetts. The training will expand the availability of courses offered to all DCA employees. Employees can access and register now for 3 DEI courses available in June of this year. DCA's first diversity, equity, and inclusion fact sheet has been released. It was developed as an informational tool and includes the department's 3 DEI initiatives. It memorializes DCA services that support DEI efforts and includes DEI terminology as it applies to DCA. The DEI Steering Committee's work continues, and I look forward to updating you in the months ahead on our progress. Next is a required board member trainings reminder. There are 2 DCA-wide mandatory trainings for 2023. This includes sexual harassment prevention training and information security awareness. All DCA employees and appointees, including board and advisory council members, will need to complete the sexual harassment prevention training this year. Board members must take the 2-hour supervisory training, and advisory council members must take the 1-hour non-supervisory training. This training is required every odd-numbered year and is online, self-paced, in approximately 2 hours. Board members with an assigned DCA email, which would be dca.ca.gov, are required to complete the Information Security Awareness Fundamentals training. This training addresses everyone's role in protecting DCA data and information. The training is online and required every year. Both the sexual harassment prevention training and information security awareness training are available in the department's learning management system, which we commonly refer to as LMS. For more information, a mandatory trainings page has been created to help members identify, access, and track specified trainings. This page includes direct links to the mandatory trainings as well as pertinent information and policies specific to those training courses. You may go to dca.ca.gov and click on the DCA Board Member Resource Center page under Required Board Member Training. You can also reach out to myself or Yvonne Durantes. In addition, as this year's annual Form 700 period comes to a close, DCA and BBR would like to thank all of our board and committee members and executive officers who helped us achieve compliance. As a reminder, board members must complete BMOT within 1 year of their appointment or reappointment. On June 20th, 2023, BMOT will be offered in person in Sacramento and again on October 10th, 2023 at a location to be determined. Members can register for this training via LMS. Also, as all of you are aware, legislation passed last year amending provisions of the Bagley-Keene Open Meeting Act to extend the ability of state bodies such as DCA's, boards, and bureaus to conduct public meetings virtually through July 1st, 2023. Absent the passing of new legislation to extend these provisions, DCA's boards and bureaus will not be allowed to conduct meetings virtually after July 1st, 2023. DCA is aware of legislation recently introduced, SB 544 Laird, which removes certain teleconference requirements from the Open Meeting Act. However, this bill does not include an urgency clause. It will not take effect until January 1st, 2024. Therefore, boards and bureaus should be prepared to conduct public meetings in person in the interim beginning July 1st, 2023. In other news, on January 5th, 2023, a new federal law took effect that enables service members and their spouses who had professional licenses in a different state to practice in California within the same professional discipline and at a similar scope of practice, if they are required to relocate to California due to their military orders. Since becoming aware of the new law, DCA has been collaborating with agency on how best to implement it. DCA will share information as it becomes available. In the meantime, should your board receive any inquiry from a service member or spouse regarding this new law, please contact DCA Legal Affairs. Finally, DCA submitted its 2021-2022 annual report to the legislature, and the report is now available on the DCA website. This annual report includes a new design and additional reporting metrics such as military licensing data, now required for all DCA boards and bureaus. We hope that you will take time to review this impressive compilation of the valuable work at the boards and bureaus. As I close, thank you again for this opportunity, and I welcome any questions from the committee.
All right, thank you, Ms. Geer. Any questions from the committee? Okay, hearing none. Do we have any questions from those in the room? Okay, hearing none, I will open it up to the WebEx participants. So if we can have them respond, please.
We are now accepting public comment on the DCA update. If you would like to make a comment, please type the word comment into the Q&A box in the lower right-hand corner of the screen and send that comment to all participants. Dial-in users, please dial *3 to raise your hand, and we will call on people in the order we have requests. We're going to take a few seconds now to see if we have a request for public comment. Seeing no request for public comment, do you wish to return to the agenda?
Yes, please, and thank you. All right, we'll move on to item E. Review and possible action on the November 4th, 2022 LATC meeting minutes. And I will first ask any of the committee members if they have any comments or corrections on that. Okay, hearing none. ask if there's any questions or comments from those in the room. All right. Actually, what I should have done first is ask for a motion to approve the minutes as submitted. So moved. Okay, we have
Second.
and Susan. All right, now I will open it up for public comment, and we'll go to the WebEx participants at this time.
We are now accepting public comment on the motion. If you would like to make a comment, please type the word comment into the Q&A box in the lower right-hand corner of the screen and send that comment to all participants. Dial-in users, please dial *3 to raise your hand, and we will call on people in the order we have requests. We're going to take just a few seconds now to see if we have a request for public comment. Seeing no request for public comment, do you wish to return to the motion?
Yes, please. So I'll give one last chance to the other committee members. Any questions or anything? Okay, well, I will call for a vote on approval of the November 4th, 2022 LATC meeting minutes as submitted. And Pamela, if you'll take the roll call vote.
John Rusinski.
Yes.
Andrew Bowden.
Aye.
Patricia Trout.
Aye.
Susan Landry.
Aye.
Pamela Brief. Aye.
All right, the motion passes unanimously. We will now move on to item F, the program manager's report. And Laura, if you'll present that.
Thank you. Okay, I'm just going to go through the highlights of the report. Feel free to let me know if you have any questions as I go forward. So starting on page 1, business modernization, we were projected to have gone forward with the first release, I think, last month. They're working on a few, I guess, maybe patches or security fixes. So I don't have a new date for when it's going to start. Hopefully we'll have more information within the next week, so I will send committee members an update. So we're getting close. I appreciate all the work that staff has put into testing the system. So it'll be great once we get there. Just need to get there. The board's next meeting is May 19th. That'll be a virtual meeting. And then we have the next committee dates are August 11th and November 3rd. So at this point, they would need to be in person, as the DCA representative said, that we won't have the authority to meet virtually for the second half of this year at this point. There was an outreach presentation in October at UC Davis. And then also there was one last night with UC Berkeley that Nicholas attended virtually, and we had a subject matter expert attend as well, and I heard it went really well. That's great. Personnel update, obviously, we have Tricia's position. The assistant executive officer position is still vacant, so have some hiring to do. Social media, we have the stats there, and then the training courses staff has completed. Moving on the legislative proposal, I apologize, I don't have my notes in front of me, but Tricia and John and I had a meeting with the building officials maybe a little over a month ago. They had some concerns about the proposal, so they offered to work with us to kind of try to resolve that. And so I need to do some follow-up on that and maybe have, some more conversations, see what we can do. They don't oppose in concept, it was just practically how to make it work. John, am I summarizing that correctly, Jude? Okay. Yes. And also, I don't have any here, but we are pursuing a statutory change to increase LATC's fees. So I checked in, the DCA Legislative Office is assisting with that, and so I checked with them last week. They are still moving forward on that. They are working with the committee staff, which would be the Business and Professions Committees, to try to implement it into a larger bill, because there are a couple of programs that need a fee increase. So as I find out more, I'll send that to committee members, but we're doing everything we should be doing to get the increase. And then at the bottom of page 3, we have information on the regulatory proposals. For the exam transition plan, that became effective April 1st, and then there's a second proposal due to an additional layer administration date.
let's see, then we have one on the form of examinations. That one is still early in the process. The citation process is effective. Disciplinary guidelines are getting close. They're at OAL still. Yeah. Yeah, and then on page 6, there's a tracker of all the packages. So staff continue to do a really great job of getting LATC's regulations through. They're very speedy. Starting on page 7, there is the examination data broken down so starting with the CSE by candidate type, and then the layer pass rates, national and California. So it continues to be a little bit lower, I think, across all divisions, and we'll have that to talk about later in the agenda. And let's see, on page 8, information on the job task analysis. So that will lead to the new version, I think, assist in the new version of the LARE. So the last administration of the current version is later this year, and so the new blueprint will go into effect at the end of the year. And then here's a chart on page 9 of how the sections transition. And staff have been doing a really good job, along with Clarb, of communicating to candidates who are kind of in process as to how that will impact them. Any questions?
I just did have one question as far as...
Is your mic on?
Thank you.
Because I couldn't hear you.
Yeah, I just had one question. Any idea how soon it might be that the replacement for Trish, that position will be, the process will begin?
Yeah, that's a good question. So the assistant executive officer position has been vacant for some time, and so we'd advertised it earlier this year. I haven't made a selection, so I'm going to do another round of interviews. But in the meantime, the board's regulations manager position became vacant, so I'm filling that one first, just because of kind of programmatic needs, and then we'll move on to the next one. So it may be that I want to fill the assistant executive officer first to give that person a say. But once I'm hoping to finish the regulations one. We have the interviews in a week, so that can get done pretty quickly, and then we can move forward. So I'll keep you updated on that, and make sure I check in with you, John, as to what the committee's interested in and have some say on that process.
Thank you. All right. Any questions from other members of the committee?
Yes, Mr. Chair, I have a question. How many candidates are affected? I think we might have even asked this last meeting, but how many candidates are being affected by this the new layer format?
Right. That's a good question. Nicholas, do you have that information?
From what I recall, it was...
We can't hear you.
You might have to talk into Stacy's or Courtney's. Thanks.
It was somewhere in the order of 200 candidates at our last look.
Mm-hmm. And if I understand correctly, they have until December in order to be able to pass sections 1 and 4 in order to be able to transition. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions, comments? All right. Patricia?
Yeah, I have a question. Is there any, process in place to get this information out a little bit more so that, I assume we've contacted all the candidates, correct?
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
And I believe it's also advertised on the LATC website, correct? Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. All right, and if I'm not mistaken, I think any new candidates are being informed that it might be in their interest to hold off until after December because of the transition that's taking place at that time. All right, let's see, we will move on now. Well, let's see, actually, are there any public comments from any in the room in regards to the program manager's report? Okay, hearing none, I will open it up to our WebEx participants if they have any questions, comments on the report.
We are now accepting public comment on the report. If you would like to make a comment, please type the word comment into the Q&A box in the lower right-hand corner of the screen and send that comment to all participants. Dial-in users, please dial *3 to raise your hand. We will call on people in the order we have requests. We're going to wait just a few seconds now to see if we have a request for public comment. Seeing no request for public comment, do you wish to return to the agenda?
Yes, please. Thank you. All right, we will move on to item G, discuss some possible action on 2023 legislation. And again, I'll ask Laura Zuniga to present this item.
Thank you. Okay, so the first item is Assembly Bill 342 by Assemblymember Valencia. This is sponsored by AIA California. It would allow the board to request demographic information from candidates and licensees and then require us to report that information annually. So it doesn't require people to provide the information, but we would have to ask for it and then report it. So we're just working with the sponsor a little bit on timing. It requires us to begin reporting in January 2025, which may not be realistic if the board needs to adopt regulations, but we'll continue to work on that. Any questions on that?
Yes, is that just limited to architects and real estate appraisers as it?
It is. There are a lot of health boards within the department that request and collect demographic data now, but I don't think many or any of the non-health ones do. So. Okay.
And is that is the intent of this to basically establish the DEI characteristics of?
Yeah, I think it's influenced by DEI and trying to identify, possible barriers to licensure by, finding out more about the type of candidates we get. I will say the National Association for Architects, they do a really good job of collecting this data. So there is a lot of it available, but, if we can collect it as well, the more the better, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
Laura, does that also include LATC?
It doesn't. So if you have an interest in it, you can let me know. But yeah, the board didn't ask for it. It came from the association. The second item is SB 372. This would it impacts all the boards within the department, and it requires boards to update a license record if it receives government-issued documentation demonstrating the person's name or gender has changed, and just requires the board to establish a process to allow that to happen.
I have a question. I have a question.
Yes, Susan.
Yeah, so if I read this correctly, it said that so if you change your name or your gender and you receive the documents on the second page of the description, the former name and gender from its online license verification, and treat this information as confidential. So I know, being married 20 years ago, I have an alias listed under my name. If I go to my license board, it'll say alias Linscog. So for these people, there would be no alias listed?
Yeah, that's a good question. That was one of the issues that was raised in the policy committee analysis, is they needed a way to make sure this enforcement data that we provide online about licensees is still available. So I think that's kind of an issue that has to be worked out. So that you could still, just an individual changing their name doesn't mean that the data tied to the old name isn't still available.
But you have to make a separate request to find out the information. Is that the way I'm reading? The board would be required to establish a process to allow a person to request or obtain this information. So on my website page, if I change my name to Fred and my gender, would it then list Susan as my alias?
I don't think they would list Susan as your alias right now. Right.
So then they should no longer have to list me as the Linscog.
Yeah. So I think there's still some issues that need to be worked out to make sure that consumers are still getting access to the information.
Okay.
While still being sensitive to people who want to make the change, yeah.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
agree, but to also be fair to everybody else.
Right.
If
I
you
think
could track me down under my 20-year-old name.
Yeah, so I think there's still probably further amendments coming.
So this is final or
No,
not?
not final, yeah.
Okay. That's my only comment, is it just seems that you would still, it seems like it puts the burden on a person having to make a special request to obtain the prior information. Seems to be fair. I like being fair across the board.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
And then the last item is SB 544, which Melissa from DCA touched on. This would enact additional changes to the Bagley-Keene Act so that the boards have the ability to continue meeting virtually. It would make some changes and require there to be one physical meeting location. So that could be DCA, board office, as long as it's open and available to the public. So hopefully we'll see some permanent changes there. As she said, that's not an urgency bill, so at this point, there would definitely be a gap when the authority doesn't exist after June 30th. Any questions?
Any questions? All right, we'll open it for public comment. Here at the room. All right, hearing none, I will ask if there's any of our WebEx participants who are interested in making a comment or question to do so.
We are now accepting public comment via WebEx. If you would like to make a comment, please type the word comment into the Q&A box in the lower right-hand corner of the screen and send that comment to all participants. Dial-in users, please dial *3 to raise your hand. We will call on people in the order we have requests. We're going to take about 15 seconds now to see if we have a request for public comment. Seeing no request for public comment, do you wish to return to the agenda?
Yes, please. Thank you. All right, we will move on to item H, discuss some possible action on 2022-24 strategic plan objectives. To 1, conduct a review of the Landscape Architects Registration Exam, or LARE, and a linkage study to determine areas not covered in the LARE that need to be covered in the California Supplemental Exam, to ensure the CSE reflects the content that is unique to California. And at this time, I'll ask Laura Zuniga to introduce this item.
Thank you. And we have staff from OPES here to present on this item. Roxandra, are you going to present this? Great. So Roxandra Nunn from Office of Professional Examination Services. And
You want to go to the next slide?
okay.
Okay. Good morning. My name is Roxandra Nunn, and I'm a test specialist. Oh, is it? Okay. Good morning. My name is Roxandra Nunn, and I am a test specialist from the Office of Professional Examination Services. I'm joined by our chief, Heidi Linser. And as requested by the LATC, OPS recently completed the review of the Landscape Architects Registration Exam. We are here today to give an overview of the national review process and to present the LARE review results. Okay, next slide. In this presentation, we will be providing information about OPES and who we are. We will go over the steps in a national exam review. We will discuss OPES's evaluation of the LARE, provide a summary, and then answer questions you may have. Next slide. OPES provides professional consulting services in exam development and validation to DCA's boards, bureaus, and committees. We also review national examinations to ensure that they are still acceptable to be used as part of the licensing process. In addition, we provide recommendations based on regulations, professional guidelines, and technical standards related to licensure examinations. Next slide. taking a look at the big picture, the purpose of licensing and DCA's mission is to protect the public. And the purpose of licensure examinations is to identify those practitioners who can practice safely and competently from those who cannot. Candidates who receive a license to practice should have the minimum level of competence necessary to practice safely. So licensure exams must be developed to provide a valid and reliable method for doing so. And to be fair, when we are making decisions about who is legally allowed to practice, we must focus on entry-level tasks and knowledge important for public protection. Licensure exams must protect consumers while not limiting access to occupations or putting up artificial barriers to practice. It's a balance between the two goals, and we find that balance by ensuring that exams focus on entry-level tasks and knowledge critical for public protection, and that the exam process is fair to candidates. Next slide. OPES is mandated by BBC Section 139. Section 139 requires that boards conduct an occupational analysis for each exam at regular intervals, and that boards submit a report every year indicating the status of their occupational analysis and exam development. BPC 139 also mandates that OPES develop policies to ensure that licensure exams are valid and that they're fair to candidates. The principles for the validation and use of personnel selection procedures and the standards for educational and psychological testing require that in order to develop a valid test, first a detailed description of the content domain of interest is needed, and that's why we conduct an occupational analysis. In addition, a close link between the test content and the job content should be demonstrated. And this is why exam developers use an exam outline to develop test questions. And most importantly, actively practicing licensees serving as subject matter experts or SMEs must be included in every step of the process. Next slide. So let's talk more specifically about national exams. BPC 139 also mandates that all national exams must be reviewed in accordance with policy guidelines set by OPES. All licensure exams accepted for use in California professions regulated by DCA should be validated according to accepted technical and professional standards. These are the standards that were on the previous slide, and we also referenced them in the report that we wrote. California practice must be appropriately represented in an occupational analysis on a national level in order for the results to be valid for usage in California. The suitability of exam content for California practice must be determined by a review of the occupational analysis. Next slide. So these are the three parts of a national exam review. First, we conduct a psychometric evaluation. Second, we conduct a workshop with subject matter experts to compare the national occupational analysis results to the results of the California occupational analysis. Finally, we identify the extent to which the national exam reflects California practice, and we make recommendations based on those results. So I'll go into more detail about each of these steps on the next slide. So like I mentioned, first we evaluate the occupational analysis. We evaluate the methodology and if the content outline was used as the basis for the exam. So now I'm going to briefly explain the OA process, and then I will come back to continue discussing the psychometric evaluation of the national exam. So can you go to the next slide, and then I'll have you come back. So these are the basic steps of the occupational analysis process. The process requires involvement of subject matter experts with diverse practice backgrounds, work settings, and practice types. First, we research the profession and we conduct telephone interviews with subject matter experts. We then develop draft task and knowledge statements as well as content areas. We then develop an occupational analysis survey that we send to all licensed practitioners with an email address on file. After the survey closes, we compile and analyze the data and the demographics of the survey respondents. Finally, another group of SMEs reviews the survey results and determines the final exam outline, which also specifies the weights assigned to each content area. That final exam outline is what is ultimately used to develop the test from. If you can go back to the previous slide, please. So during the exam, the national exam review, we evaluate, like I mentioned, the occupational analysis. We also evaluate the exam development procedures, how the passing score is set, how the exam is scored, what the passing rate is. We also review the test administration, security procedures, the information that is available to candidates, and ADA accommodations. Okay, next slide. And next slide. So as we described in our report, OPS found that the layer meets psychometric standards and that the exam is properly developed using subject matter experts. In line with the standards, the layer is linked to an occupational analysis, and California licensed landscape architects were well represented at 18.51%. That was 192 of the 1,037 respondents to the survey were from California. The overall passing rates across all exam forms from 2019 to 2022 ranged from 53% to 70%. The highest pass rate was in Section 2, Planning and Design, and the lowest pass rate was in Section 3, Construction, Documentation, and Administration. These passing rates are consistent with industry standards. Next slide. Also, as described in our report, we're making the following recommendations. We recommend that CLARB does not use educators in the exam validation process. One concern is the use of educators serving as subject matter experts. CLARB allows them as long as they abide by an NDA and do not participate in test preparation for the duration of their service and for 2 years post-service. California has a formal policy stating that educators should not be involved in the development process due to potential conflict of interest. CLARB also offers remote proctoring for the layer. Because remote proctoring is not recommended for high-stakes exams, CLARB should closely monitor exam item performance data to detect potentially compromised exam items. Also, we recommend that CLARB should publish passing rates for first-time test takers so that comparisons to repeat test takers can be performed. These comparisons would enable observations of passing rate patterns to ensure consistency with other high-stakes licensure exams. Also, CLARB should attempt to increase participation of subject matter experts licensed 5 years or less to ensure an entry-level perspective is maintained. And lastly, we recommend that CLARB should update its test preparation resources to increase fairness to candidates. CLARB stated in an email to us in the fall of last year that they are working on providing practice tests at a reasonable cost to candidates because currently they do not provide that. Next slide. So I'm going to talk a little bit about our linkage study that we performed as part of this review. National exams, by definition, test aspects of practice that apply to all states. If there are areas of practice that vary across states, these will not be covered. Many occupations have California-specific aspects of practice, most commonly laws, ethics, codes, and regulations. These will not be covered on a national exam. For a licensure exam, the goal is to measure the full scope of practice in California. We use the results of the California Occupational Analysis to determine if there are California-specific areas of practice that are not assessed by the national exam. Next slide. So as part of our evaluation, we worked with subject matter experts to evaluate the content covered by the layer and compare it, or as we say, link it, with the results of the most recent occupational analysis conducted in California, which was in 2020. During this process, it was determined that the layer adequately assessed the majority of knowledge required in California, except for the following: California codes and regulations, California-specific climate and environmental considerations, California-specific professional practice, and California-specific construction site and user safety and security. The areas that were not adequately assessed by the layer are covered by the California Supplemental Examination, the CSE, The combined content of the LAIR and the CSE sufficiently assesses the knowledge necessary for competent landscape architectural practice at the time of licensure in California. Next slide. In summary, OPES found that the LAIR meets psychometric standards. The LAIR is a sufficient knowledge-based exam, but does not assess California codes and regulations, as well as California-specific considerations, professional practice, and construction site and user safety and security. The CSE should continue to measure the California-specific content that is not assessed by the LAIR. OPS recognizes that the review process of national exams is an iterative process, and we are happy to incorporate any additional data and collaborate with the board on further reviews. Next slide. Thank you very much. And do you have any questions for me?
Thank you very much. I do have a couple. On your last slide, one of the areas that you looked at not being covered by the national exam was California-specific professional practice. Can you give us just a brief definition of what that is?
This is referring to contracts, things like minimizing liability, like interacting with regulatory agencies. It didn't refer to CDs or design or anything like that. It was just more what the contractor has to know in addition to the technical knowledge, in addition to knowing all the codes and how to actually design and perform the job. It's knowing how to interact with the agencies and knowing how to develop contracts with the clients and interacting with the clients.
All right, thanks. My other question has to do with proctoring issues. I know just based on conversations that I've heard from CLARB that they seem to be pushing in that direction. I guess my question is, if that becomes the norm, how does California plan on specifically addressing that issue?
Are you referring to all of it being remotely proctored, or right now the candidate has the option,
right,
and if they are requesting a special accommodation, then it would not be a remote proctored situation. So I don't know if they will ever be able to go to fully remote proctors because of the ADA accommodations, and I don't have the statistics for how many choose a remote proctored option versus the ones who choose the in-person. I can get that information from you. Mm-hmm. I do think that there are still a lot of candidates who are choosing the in-person proctored option.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Andy.
Thank you very much for this very informative presentation. I do have one comment or a question, I guess. During the presentation, you made several different references to CLARB should do this or CLARB should not do that. We have no basis or no way of being able to tell them what they can and can't do. Obviously, they're their own organization. So are these just suggestions to CLARB? Or it kind of made it sound like CLARB should not do this. Well, okay, they do what they want to do, and all we can do is just follow along or don't accept it, one of the two. Can you maybe elaborate on that a little bit?
Well, making recommendations based on the results is part of the review process. They can request a copy of the report from, I believe, from what I'm aware, from the board, and they can read the recommendations, but we can't force them to make any changes.
Right.
But the board can talk to CLARB and tell them they can provide feedback. The board is part of the community that uses the examination. Typically, they ask for your input in certain processes. So we encourage the board, if they can, to either provide the report or let CLARB know that they should be doing some of these things.
Okay, thank you very much.
And we would be open to doing that, so. Any other questions, comments from the committee? All right. I will now open it up to any questions or comments from the room. All right, hearing none, I will ask that our WebEx participants see if you have any questions or comments.
We are now accepting public comment via WebEx. If you would like to make a comment, please type the word comment into the Q&A box in the lower right-hand corner of the screen and send that comment to all participants. Dial-in users, please dial *3 to raise your hand, and we will call on people in the order we have requests. We're going to take a few seconds now to see if we have a request for public comment. We have a request for comment from, forgive me, I don't know how to pronounce your name, Robinson. Bear with us just a moment. We're going to send you a request to unmute your microphone.
This is Robinson.
Yes, go ahead, please.
Hi, I just want to clarify so the layer will be reformatted, but the CSC will stay the same?
Yes, the CSC is going to stay the same, at least until the next occupational analysis. The last occupational analysis was performed in 2020, and we are currently using the blueprint that resulted from that occupational analysis. And occupational analyses are performed roughly every 5 to 7 years. So we still have quite a while before we start the new occupational analysis.
Okay, so if the layer gets updated, I think I heard you mention that it might reflect on some of the CSE exam questions. So that would be updated still until another 5 years?
This is Michael Knoch, your legal counsel. Public comment is really a time for the public to offer their views or discuss matters. It's not really the opportunity to ask questions. So, you know, ultimately, member of the public, if you have any other comments, please direct them to the committee, but we're not going to be asking, we can't be really answering a lot of questions at this time.
Okay, thank you.
All right, if we have no further comments.
There are no other requests, Mr. Chair.
All right, thank you.
Thank you so much.
All right, thank you. All right, so we will now move on to item 2. Identify and analyze the causes of low pass rates among California exam candidates in comparison to national pass rates to determine areas of concern and develop a plan of action to decrease deficiencies. And again, I'll ask Laura Zuniga to introduce this item.
Thank you for attending to present today. So we have Robert Calvert from OPES presenting, and thank you.
All right, thank you.
All right. Greetings, my name is Robert Calvert. I'll be giving a presentation regarding California pass rates on the layer to the Landscape Architect Registration Examination. I'm joined today with Chief OPS, Heidi Lenser, and I want to thank the LAT staff for providing data for this analysis. It was time intensive. All right. I find that when giving these presentations, it's nice to give a roadmap to set expectations for what will be covered in the presentation. In this presentation, I'll give some general information regarding the layer and current policies related to it. I'll then briefly address previous analyses regarding the layer before moving into the findings of this analysis. At the end of the presentation, I'll present some conclusions and respond to any questions you may have. The layer has 4 sections. Sections 1 and 2 are attempted after graduation, and sections 3 and 4 are attempted after a required amount of work experience. As you're aware, that policy is going to change shortly, but all of the data I have to analyze comes from that basis. The current layer sections, which will change. Section 1, Project and Construction Administration. Section 2, Inventory and Analysis. Section 3, Design. Section 4, Grading, Draining, Construction Documentation. I want to remind you that I did a presentation regarding pass rates approximately a year-ish ago, and there were some findings from that I want to bring to your attention. First, we didn't find gender to be a significant difference in pass rate. We also didn't find the type of degree that you achieved, whether or not it was graduate level or simply bachelor's. We did find that Section 2 was significant, which is to say that California had a much lower pass rate in Section 2 than the rest of the nation. That doesn't mean it was the lowest, it just means it was significantly lower than the average. And last, the pathway to licensure was not a significant indication of passing. That was from the previous analysis. Here, we have the baseline question, does California have different pass rates than the national average? And second, if there are those differences, can we track down where they come from? And by that, we went to schools. And the heart of this analysis is looking at the pass rate by the school that the candidate attended. I haven't been saying next. You guys have been doing it, right? Next slide. You're awesome. Helping me out. All right. Here's a pile of numbers for you. I'm going to take a minute. This data was provided by CLARB and represents all candidates who graduated from these schools and attempted a section of the layer between 2020 and 2022. So not just California, to be clear. First, the good news. Recent data does not show a meaningful difference between California scores and national scores. However, when broken down by school, it is clear that some schools perform significantly better than others. I've marked green for schools that are outperforming national standards, black for the approximately equal, and orange for below national. It's worth noticing that Pomona contributes a greater portion of the average number of attempts per section while simultaneously having very low pass rates. Later, we're going to see that Pomona doesn't actually necessarily have more students than some schools. They're on the higher end, but they do contribute a lot in the way of attempts to this test. I'm going to say this a few times, so be warned. Different is not necessarily bad. We do not have enough information to explain why this difference exists. There are many factors that contribute to educational preparation, as well as licensure examination performance. Now we're going to dive a little bit more in. For context, I took layer pass rates and the architect pass rate, ARE pass rates, for schools that had overlapping programs, which is to say both in California. This isn't conclusive in any way. This is just to show a trend. Cal Poly, at or above. Pomona was below in both for all sections, and Berkeley is above in all sections. As rational people, we're not too surprised by the fact that different schools have different performances across. And I'm going to say again, different is not necessarily bad. They serve different communities. That's a base. Okay, now a little bit more nitty-gritty. The highly persistent test taker. This is a test taker that fails and tries again, and fails and tries again, and fails and tries again. The top 20 candidates who took the most attempts account for 11% of the failed attempts. In other words, 1.7% account for close to 12% of the failures. They continue taking it, and they continue failing. They do eventually pass. That's the good news. We'll get to that eventually. But there are people who just take this test over and over and over again. CLARB doesn't report some data that we would like. So when we think about this person who takes the test over and over and over again, in one way, they have 20 attempts. In another way, it's just one person. We would like to receive that data as the first time a person attempts a section. This person passed or failed. And then we can compare apples to apples, rather than having a disproportionate number of attempts from very few individual people. And the way to get that is to report a first-time pass rate. That's standard practice. It's what we always recommend. It's how we report. It's how most people report. All right, because we have data, I can tell you about the first-time pass rate for California people because, thanks to our board, they did a lot of legwork to get me data. Analysis of California's data shows modest improvements in pass rates for all institutions. We would expect that. If you just look at a single person, you're getting rid of that number of attempts that a person failed before they succeeded. So first time is generally going to be higher, but it wasn't much higher for any one school than another school. In other words, it didn't really help out Pomona. We weren't able to say that this school has just a large number of people who are taking it a ton of times and failing. All schools improved as we would expect, but none more so than others in any significant way. If this data was provided nationally, it would provide for a different level of analysis where we could compare our pass rates to national pass rates in a way that gets rid of some of the noise of that very persistent test taker. All right. Cal Poly's data from 18 to 22. This data was provided by LATC and took a lot of time, so I want to give them credit. This is hopefully, no, it's tiny, I'm sorry. This is a way to look at the pass rate by section and compare across between Pomona and other schools. And across the board in this data set, Pomona scores lower. It's statistically significant for sure, there isn't a question. So I'm going to say again, different is not necessarily bad. There are a lot of factors that go into this that we can't know from this analysis. We'll keep that where we can consider it. If we were to remove Pomona's data from your set, California scores better than national in all of them. Again, different is not bad. Okay. Now, this is, again, small, but you should be able to see, I hope. I decided to look at this.
Slide forward.
Oh, slide forward, sorry. Next slide. Thank you. Oh, tiny, tiny, tiny slide. Well, I'll just tell you without numbers first. If you break this down, you say, I'm only interested in the people who took all 4 sections. And I'm looking at them as individuals, not as their attempts. I say, okay, if you've made it to all of these sections, what's your pass rate? The pass rate goes up. We're not surprised by that. People who have persisted through are likely to be higher performers. But there's still a difference, and it's significant, between Cal Poly and other schools. Even when they're making it through all of the sections, they're still passing a lower rate. What that removes is the idea that Cal Poly has low performers and high performers, and the high performers are moving through the same as everybody else. Because even those that make it all the way through are not doing so in a super expedient manner. In other words, they're taking a lot of attempts to get through. I do want to note, and this is numbers after I just said I wasn't, that Pomona accounts for approximately 28% of the candidates in this analysis, right now, in just this one slide, when we're talking about people who took all 4 sections. And that is roughly proportional to the 33%, which is their proportion of all students who take this test. And that's good news for Pomona. Their students are getting to the point where they're taking all 4 sections. We're not losing them, or I mean, we're losing some, but we're not disproportionately losing them in a way that would be more concerning. I just threw a whole bunch of numbers and ideas at you. I'm going to stop for a second and ask if that was clear. Am I allowed to ask for questions right now? If you guys have any questions before I just keep throwing things at you, I'd be happy to take them.
Yeah, I guess one question I have when we're looking at pass rates, it's just simply yes or no, correct?
That is
it's
correct.
not like, did they just barely pass or did they really pass?
CLARB has that information, we do not.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Pamela?
Yes, thank you. This is a great report. I have a question as it applies. I believe at one of the first slides when you are showing the various schools, extension is
Yes.
listed, but there's dashes through.
Mhm.
Can you
Good calling me out on
explain that,
Thank you.
please?
Yes. All right. The short is small sample size. So though I have data for them, I didn't include it here as the first piece. The second piece is there were discrepancies between our data and the data that we received from CLARB, and we didn't have the time to be able to find out why that was. So I'm very confident in the analysis I did, but I didn't want to present data that I had and then present data they had and show them not similar to each other. So that's why those were. You will see information on the extensions later when it's purely from the LATC information, and it isn't talking about these pass rates. Because there we know this person finished and got a credential, like, you know, got the license, not credential, I'm sorry. So we're very confident of that. So I do include them a little bit later, but that's why they're excluded here.
Okay, and the reason that I ask is that there was one area where you were talking about that repeating, I believe it was.
Highly
You had-
persistent testing.
Yeah, you had Pomona at 2% and then UCLA at 7%.
Uh-huh. Yep.
And is that based on that data that you're?
That's based on my analysis.
Okay.
So, because that came directly from LATC and we have those records, I'm very confident that that is true. But they've already made it through to us. I don't have national data, so I can't be able to speak outside for what CLARB sent us, and that's why I excluded that there. I did include that 7%. Let me go back to that.
Yes, you did.
I didn't even talk about it. That was just a number up on a screen. So super small sample. I'm sorry, I'm answering a question. I don't need a PowerPoint in front of me. I put it there for context to understand, not because it is statistically significant. Really, it is there more as exculpatory evidence for Pomona, that Pomona's participation in this group is proportional to their population. UCLA's extension wasn't, but because their sample size is so small, that's a difference of 2 people or 1 person, you know, because their overall population is small to begin with. We don't want to draw large conclusions from that.
Understood. Okay.
So
that makes sense. Thank you.
Thank you for grabbing it. All right, other questions?
Just one other question. Just looking at that slide that was just there, the USC program, I'm assuming that those candidates must have come from the master's degree program? Okay, yeah. All right, thank you.
Chair, I've got a question.
Yes, Andy?
Does demographics play any part of this?
Yes.
Okay.
That was not part of this analysis, but we're absolutely certain that is going to play.
The reason why I ask is that, you know, it's always been presented to us in past years that one of the reasons for lower pass rates in California was because in some schools, and maybe it's Cal Poly Pomona, maybe one, that where English is not the primary language spoken at home. So, which means that students are trying to be trained in landscape architecture in a language that's not their native language, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Right.
So I didn't know if that plays into this at all.
I'm trying to answer you well. Yes, we're sure demographics matters. Everyone here knows that that is true. We all know that people come to the test with very different backgrounds. The stereotypical Berkeley student is likely very different than the stereotypical UC Davis student who's different from the SAC. Like, we know that. This analysis doesn't evaluate that. And one of the difficulties, even if we do, is to try to tease out the why, because it's just a proxy. Demographics stand for many other things, which are experiences, and we're never going to get a good understanding of experience and explanation on this large of a scale. You are correct that Pomona has a disproportionately larger Hispanic population than other schools. That is true. Pomona has a disproportionately larger population of Hispanic students than other schools. That's not in this program. We didn't run that analysis. But that baseline is accurate. The other half of that is if the test is measuring minimal competence, which is what the presentation right before me says, then in some ways, however unfortunate, it's not, a difference can exist, but if they don't have the skills necessary, they shouldn't pass the test. So the place to look is the test setting the right bar? Is it actually evaluating minimal competence, which is what it needs to do, and that's what Roxander just presented to you, that it is in line with standards on. So that's a side note. I hope that addressed your question. It was a little past. other pieces?
I have a question. So this type of information, is it available to the public? Is it, I mean, what are we doing with this?
You're talking about the demographic information, or are you talking about?
Yeah.
Demographics by university are available publicly. Demographics based on these tests and people passing and failing and connecting those are not available to us right now. Heidi, do you want to speak to that at all? No.
Well, as you heard earlier, with the focus on DEI, this is becoming a topic of discussion for multiple boards, and collecting that data and how we use that data and how to collect it. It's an ongoing, it will become a forefront issue, I believe, that all programs are going to be looking at.
I didn't fully answer your question. Try again. I'll try.
Well, I'm just wondering, you know, I would think this type of information could be valuable to the program that they have at Cal Poly Pomona, but that's why I'm asking what we do with this.
I don't know what Pomona will do with this, so why?
Has Pomona been made aware of this?
Staff did make Pomona aware this week, and so we'll do some follow-up with them.
Oh, okay, but it was only just this week, okay.
Right.
Great, thank you.
Are we only asking questions, or are we to make comments yet?
I do have more to say. I just
Okay, that's what I was thinking, you had more.
I have more. I actually
Because I
have
got
some.
lots of comments.
Yeah. No, it's just because I threw so many tables at you, I wanted to stop and see if there were any pieces on the table. Okay, so let's see, where were we? Behind me, what slide are we on? Okay, one more slide, I believe, then we'll be going. Yeah, great. Helping me out. Okay, this is the take a slight sigh of relief slide. So after I stressed you out a little bit, this takes all of the candidates and it asks, okay, if you have attempted all 4 of the sections, what proportion have you passed? All of them, and now you're good to go. Because this stops at it started and stopped at arbitrary times, there are candidates who are in the process of finishing their program, right? They're in the process of passing that last section they didn't pass, whichever one it was, and this has an arbitrary end. So within these arbitrary bookends, we can then evaluate, of those who have tried all 4, how many of them have passed all 4, no matter how many times they attempted. So now we're thinking about this as a person, not an attempt on a test. And if you look at persons, the Pomona pass rate in this measure is 77%. It is still lower than the other universities. UCLA Extension is slightly lower than it, small sample size. But the point is that when we look at it this way, the person eventually got past this hurdle. Doesn't say all of them, but again, we had an arbitrary end. There's no reason to believe the people that are not represented as passes here are not going to go pass later. I just had to stop the analysis at some point. Other schools do better. Berkeley has a 93%. Well, that also has an arbitrary end. Those 7% in Berkeley probably didn't just go move to North Dakota, but we just don't know about them because they haven't finished all 4. They didn't pass one of them, and our end time hit. So I'm going to say for the 4th time, different is still not necessarily bad. When we're serving a different population, it is very encouraging to see that in the end, that licensure is achieved for a large number. If we ended up here and it was still 40% where we started, that would be very concerning in a different way. That's talking about people, that's not talking about attempts. But when we bring it down to the person, the thing that matters, our pass rate is getting up there. Okay. All right. There is a difference. We're sure about that. Statistics says one of these schools is not like the other. Now, we have the problem of causation. Why? Why is that different? And this analysis is not going to answer that question. That goes back to your question. There are so many factors that contribute to differences. We can say with confidence there is a difference. I won't be able to tell you why that difference is present. I can, however, tell you some guesses as to things that may be causes. Next slide. The first one is chance. There's a chance that this difference was just the roll of the dice. That is an infinitesimally small chance. But statistics, as a statistics person, I can tell you there's always a chance. Second, there is very likely a difference in the type of candidate who attends different schools. Those differences are broad, and those could reasonably affect pass rates. Again, these are possible causes or differences in curriculum, which is to say everything from the teacher to the book that was chosen to whether or not they have good connections to internships. All of that is part of the process of moving through the education. And right now, we have as a large one the quality of your work experience. Because you have to wait to take the exam, which is about to change, your work experience is the most recent experience you have prior to taking this test. If that work experience was closely aligned to what is on the test, clearly you're going to do better on the test than if it wasn't. All of these things intermingle. A high-performing student from Berkeley likely is getting good work experience somewhere. It's not always true, but we can't in any way, for what I have, tell you which of these things it is. I'm just giving you some ideas as to things it may be. And the last one is, of course, the validity of the examination. That is here, but it has about as low of a chance as the chance one did. We just did analysis of the exam. There's no indication at this time that there's a problem with the exam. New data would potentially change our view on that, but at this point, there's nothing to point in that direction. Next slide. Some conclusions for you in super tiny font. Starting off, California pass rates are close to national averages, straight across the board. We're no longer in a place where we would say that they're statistically significantly different. That could change again, but right now that's the way it is. California pass rates are better than national averages if Cal Poly Pomona's data is removed. For the sixth time, differences are not bad. Please take that away from this presentation. Yes, Pomona is different. That is not necessarily bad. We know that schools serve different communities and commonly have different pass rates. This is true for all boards. Any board who wanted to look at their results will see differences by schools. And finally, we don't have any evidence of the cause or more likely causes of the difference between Pomona and other institutions. That wasn't within the scope of this, and I can't speak to it. Next slide. Our brief recommendations. First, to evaluate pass rates after the implementation of the new examination. It's going to change. When things change, we want to look carefully and have some scrutiny. Also, your changes in policy to make it so that you can take all 4 sections rather than the work experience may have some effect on these pass rates. The fact that both of those are happening at the same time makes it so it will be very difficult to figure out which one of those it was. That's okay. Next is to explore other avenues of data collection for evaluation, which may include national demographic information. If we have that information, I can then analyze it for you. As it stands, we don't have the information. So that was why I had to answer you the way I did, Andrew. Those are my recommendations. Thank you. Do you have any questions? Take 2.
All right, thank you. Any comments, questions, Susan?
Yeah, I'm going to make some observations, especially because I went to Cal Poly Pomona. But I graduated in 1983. So I am a very visual, graphic person. Our profession, so much of it is that we draw drawings. We put pen to paper, we lay it out spatially, we figure out where sprinklers go, where plants go, where walkways go. None of that is on our test. And our test is all now multiple choice, reading, and I'm somewhat dyslexic. I look at a question on an exam, and I sit there for 5 minutes. I can't even figure out like what the paragraph says truly to relate to the options. I get lost. Give me a test, I probably don't do very well. Give me a piece of paper and ask me to draw it, I'd probably get A+. Ask me to speak about it, I'd probably get a B. So I know from when I was at Cal Poly, we were very oriented towards grading and drainage and drawings and irrigation, where my friend who went to Berkeley was very theoretical, very written, writes paragraphs, writes reports, and that's our test is geared to that. The test, and I have complained about this, and part of why I'm on this board is we're getting away from what we are as a profession. We draw, that's our job. I mean, we write reports and do other things, but you produce a set of construction documents, design plans, but we aren't testing on that anymore. I mean, I remember rolling in my drafting chair and pens and papers and, you know, having a table and sitting and having to draw, and that's what you do every day pretty much on your job, or most of us. So I'm somewhat disheartened that Pomona is so low, but I am not surprised. And when you get into demographics, it may also be interesting to find out how people, like, how they think or how they learn. Like when my daughter was in school, they had the 7 ways of learning. Some people learn rote memorization. Some people learn by getting up, walking around. Some are tactile. But our exam is now going back pretty much to this basic read a paragraph, pick a multiple choice, but that's not how our profession operates. And so I'm not surprised by the statistics. I'm disheartened, and I think it goes now to this, our exam itself is what we are testing versus what each school's specialty is. And if we can't draw as part of our test, I think we're missing a whole opportunity for people, especially if English isn't their primary language. You can draw on a piece of paper and you don't have to necessarily know English as clearly. So I appreciate all the information. I think it's good to bring it to us, and it really opens my eyes even more to why I think we should be pursuing an exam that goes back to some drawings.
Andy?
Just want to think here for a second about the different schools. When you look at the UC schools, the grade point average that it takes in order to get to a UC is much higher than it is to get into a state school. But then we have Cal Poly Pomona, or Cal Poly SLO, which is also a state school, but yet they, I believe, are a impacted program, if I'm remembering correctly. So to be able to get into that program requires a special GPA and I think demonstrated ability. Cal Poly Pomona, though, from what I was told, and I don't know this to be true, so I don't want to be, you know, denigrating my alma mater, because I also went to Cal Poly Pomona back in the day.
Me too.
Way back in the day.
Way back in the day.
Yeah.
We didn't draw drawings. We had to carve things out in stone and clay tablets.
Chisel.
And chisel, yeah. So, but that having been said, but I've been told that Cal Poly Pomona is not a restricted program. It's no longer an impacted program, at least not by the guidelines from when I had to apply to that program myself. And I was told that they are required to take pretty much anybody who applies to the program, regardless of ability, or I don't want to say GPA, because I'm sure they still have requirements for GPA. But so I guess really what I'm saying is that when you start looking at the different schools, USC, UCLA, UC Davis, UC Berkeley, there's some requirements just to be able to even get into the program. Let's take the UCLA program just as an aside, because it's an extension program, it's a little bit different. But even to get into the program, you already have to have a bachelor's degree at a minimum to be able to get in there. So, you know, each school's got their own requirements. Then we have kind of the outlier being Cal Poly Pomona. Again, I'm not trying to, you know, using your words, you know, different is not. I'm sorry. What was your comment?
Different is not bad.
Different is not bad. Thank you very much. So I'm not saying that it's bad. It's just different. So, but then there comes to the thing, your point about saying, you know, minimum competency that the test is trying to test for. So at the very minimum, these people, regardless of which program that they're going to, has to be able to educate their students to be able to meet that requirement, regardless of what the program is. You've got a questioning look on your face.
I do, but I don't want to interrupt you.
All right. Well, no, please do, because I'm kind of going off on a tangent here.
this is not a statistical answer. This is my answer because you asked. Yes, a school is responsible for its results. We understand that. But a school also that gives someone a chance who wouldn't have a chance somewhere else, even if they have lower pass rates, those who pass, and it was 77% who eventually get there, wouldn't have had the option somewhere else. So to me, that is a victory, even though the number doesn't look as good. Yes, you have to hold the school accountable. Yes, they should be teaching. Absolutely. I have a background in academia. I love to, I fully support that. Yet, we also need to understand that there's only so far you're going to go from where you come in to when you leave my classroom, like just in a small space. And we're just trying to improve, and we're trying to move people along to a better space. And if they get through the program and they get to their licensure, it's highly likely that their life improved much more than somebody who came from Harvard and didn't get through the program and can go do something else. I'm not saying they won't, but when we look at the change in a person's life, I think Pomona maybe contributing more changes to people's lives than other schools are, and that has nothing to do with the numbers I just showed you.
I'm glad you brought that up because, yeah, I agree with that wholeheartedly. Again, it's my alma mater. I'm very proud of that school and the things that it's accomplished, over the many years. So, it is different. It's a different program than maybe the other schools. And, being different and being an outlier is not necessarily bad. It does give these other students an opportunity that like you said, they might not have had the program not been there. So, but knowledge is power. So it's what do we do with this information, and communicating this to the schools is helpful. The thing that I think has to be we have to be a little cautious about, and that is if somebody was looking at going to Cal Poly Pomona versus going to USC, of course, big, huge difference in dollars there, right? But if they said, well, if I go to Cal Poly Pomona, my chances of successfully passing the exam is this, and if I go to USC, wow, their numbers are so much higher. Of course, there's a $150,000 difference between the two programs, maybe even more than that, actually. But still, I mean, we don't want to do something that's going to impact the program's ability to attract students. So, again, knowledge is power, but we have to use it judiciously.
If I was a person who could get into USC, my pass rate isn't Pomona's average pass rate.
I'm having a hard time hearing you.
Oh, I'm sorry. If I could get into USC, my pass rate is not the same as Pomona's average pass rate. The average Pomona pass rate student is not going to be admitted to USC, as you said before, due to GPA restrictions. So if it was me sitting there looking at Pomona, I'm going to say, I know my academic ability. I'm willing to take this cheaper school, and I believe that my pass rate's going to be higher than this. And I don't want to spend $150,000 extra dollars for the same license. That's a person I could imagine thinking that through. But I also agree with you that no one, just putting the numbers out there, could dissuade people from a program that otherwise they could attend.
Patricia?
Yeah, I don't have a question, but I just want to say thank you for this presentation, because we've talked a lot over the years about this, the scores and whatnot, and it just was very informative, and I appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right, I have a couple questions. Obviously, this really clarifies a lot of the issues that we've been looking at over the years, as Patricia has said. My primary question is, if we wanted to take this to the next step, what specific type of data do you think would really hone in? And I'm going to premise that this seems to be based primarily on where they went to school. And as you mentioned earlier, under the understanding that up until this point in time, they were able to basically take 2 sections prior to having the requisite experience that they have to have. We know that CLARB is moving where they want every candidate to be able to take all 4 sections right out of school without any experience. And we've argued our belief with them that we think that's a huge mistake. So the question that I have is, I think, at least in my mind, the next step in this study, if that's what we want to call it, would be to look specifically at the level of experience that these candidates have when they sit for the exam. And I guess the only way of really knowing that is like how many years of experience post-graduation do the candidates have prior to sitting for the exam. So I see some trouble coming up, so to speak, because I think it's going to be, if they're able to take all 4 right out of school, I think there's going to be some inherent discrepancies there really between programs. I think that's really going to start becoming much more evident at that point. So if we go to CLARB, for instance, and we say we want some national data on your pass rates, we want to know what schools they went to, we want to know how much experience that they've had when they sit for the exam, and we want demographic data. How reasonable do you think that would be to ask them for that?
Want to take that idea, or should I?
Well, they gave us all the data they had, school-related data, and by section. I don't believe they have demographic data. Is that correct, Robert?
I do not believe they have demographic data.
So it seems like they've been forthcoming with what they have, so.
I would be very happy to work with you in talking about what data was needed. I can talk about that now, but I don't know that this is the right venue for it, so I defer to you. If you want me to answer it, I will, but it'll be technical.
If you could just give me just a really quick overview of what you think that would be.
Sure. I mean, very quick overview. When you say experience, I immediately ask what type of experience. There are 3 different offices that do very different things, and it could be that one of these offices is doing things that are on a test and the other 2 aren't. It's all landscape architecture. One of those students is much more likely to do well the 2 years after. So if you wanted to understand the experience component, I wouldn't personally look nationally. I would look here because you have more power here. And if you gathered more data on your candidates and what their experience was like rather than just years, I think you might find some interesting things. Mm-hmm. That's my short answer.
Mm-hmm. Andy?
I think you touched on this already in your presentation, so excuse me if I'm asking a question you've already answered, but how does the pass rate for the landscape architecture program at Cal Poly Pomona feature with or compare to the architecture program at Cal Poly Pomona?
They're below in both.
They're below in both. But I mean, is it the same, by the same amount? Is it I mean, are they similar pass rates for both programs?
No, but they are not statistically significantly different.
Okay.
So that roughly speaking, Pomona's was in the 40s for the LARE and roughly speaking the 50s for the ARE. But I wouldn't stand by that as being evidence that those are for sure not one better than the other. Does that make sense?
Okay. So I guess what I'm trying to get it set in my own mind is can we draw any conclusions from that information?
The conclusion I would like you to draw from that is that schools are large entities and that they have patterns that persist across programs. So the landscape architect and the architect both score lower in Pomona. It's also likely that the admittance requirements for both is lower than it is at Berkeley. What I was trying to get at is that this is a thing that is not isolated to your board or to landscape architecture, but rather that there are systemic differences across schools and their performance in many different examinations.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you very much, Dr. Calvert.
Oh, Pam had...
Susan? Oh, Pamela? Okay. Yep.
Yeah. Yeah, as far as alma mater, I'm Switzerland, right here. Except for the fact that I am teaching at UCLA, so I want to address, I'm the reason. I do want to address a question to legal first and ask if I am allowed to ask questions that pertain to UCLA, because I am a teacher there as well, and so am I creating a conflict of interest?
This is Michael Knotes, legal counsel. There's no decision to be made today. The only time a board member needs to recuse themselves is if there's going to be a decision making that they have a financial interest in. I think it's appropriate that you disclose the relationship, and I think you can make comments that are relevant to this agenda item.
Exactly. Okay, thank you very much. I'm going to get back to what our charge is, and that is to look at the health, safety, and welfare as it relates to licensees for landscape architecture. And with that, I see that this information could be valuable because it could be helping us to determine where there might be some deficiencies, perhaps. In your mind, and with your experience and your degrees, how would you suggest we go about doing that? Because as you're saying, different isn't necessarily bad. What are the things that we could do to really help us fine-tune to understand, is it what is being taught, or is it the demographic, or is it something else? Or is that just is there just too much information to gather that it's almost impossible to figure that out?
I don't know what the scope of power of the board is, so that would be my first concern, is what is it that you can and can't touch? For example, I don't know if you have oversight of schools or not. I don't think you do, but I don't know that. So I may not be the right person to ask because I don't know what power you have. As a person, I would encourage you to talk with Pomona in a ally, I want to understand, I want to support, I want to advocate for you. If this test isn't fair, as is your point, we need to get good reason to that. Now, we just heard from Roxana that there aren't issues with the test, but I'm not going to step there. I'm saying that's within your space. I don't think coming in saying, Pomona, you need to shape up or is a good idea. That's my bias.
But wasn't thinking that would be.
Yeah. But I think trying to understand a good picture of what is going on with Pomona. What are your admittance policies? What types of students are you pulling in? What is their background? And that doesn't need to be necessarily a comparison to Berkeley. What it does is let you understand one space. It lets you understand what's going on in Pomona. And then as a board where you have power to advocate, you could advocate for the people that you now understand better. And there is the truth that they eventually are passing at a reasonable rate. So what
and at a rate higher than UCLA.
Not statistically significantly, but yes.
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 And so based on the fact that you didn't have the data prior, on the previous slides, you didn't have the data for UCLA because you weren't confident of the information you had been given. Should we also hold the same concern about UCLA?
I would say no.
Okay.
I'm not going to throw a ton of numbers in there. What I saw from UCLA is a very small sample. So it would be not the time to take large action where we don't have, by my view, enough information to act. That's the first. The second is it appears that the UCLA Extension's third and fourth sections have much lower pass rates than their first and second. Now, because of the current rules around experience, and because this population, as I understand it, is like a night weekend program, it could be that their experience is not comparable to the experience that other students are receiving for the 2 years that they are waiting, or however many years it is, before they can take the examination. So if I was going to inquire with UCLA, that's the direction I would be asking. Now, you likely know that better than I do as you teach there. But
Yeah, yeah. What additional information would you need in order to put UCLA's data on those front-end slides?
my guess is that you guys will request that we follow up with you once I have been able to cross-reference with CLARB's data and make sure.
Okay.
In which case, I will get you the data. I have our data. I have their data.
Yeah.
I didn't want to muddy the waters with that right now.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I'm going to go back to DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, to my prior comment about the way people think and the way people take tests. I'm a terrible test taker. Paper tests, written multiple choice. I admit that. I admitted it in college. Does Cal Poly's Pomona's program, is it more graphic oriented? What is their method of teaching? And if we're going to be diverse and inclusive, having a written test with multiple choice is, to me, not inclusive. You're not picking up the way different people think and the way our profession operates. So is there something that we could do in regards to this, of trying to understand what is it that, how are these people learning? Are they learning by drawing? Are they learning by reading a book? Because that could help, I really want us to go back to having drawing components to our tests, but having to be able to justify that, I other than stuff like this, I can't say, well, yeah, these people learn to draw, but they don't learn to take a multiple choice test. I can't say that. But I think we should, as a board, be looking at the diversity and equity when it comes to the way people take tests and the way people think and the way they learn. And my own experience from Cal Poly was very drawing-oriented, and like I said, my friend from Berkeley was very paragraph-oriented and that kind of stuff, and nowhere in any of this information. I know this was limited, and what you did provide was very helpful and I think gets to my point, but I would like to know how we could then evaluate, based on this, the way the exam is presented to people.
Well, one of the things Robert brought up as a possible difference was curriculum. And so that is something, that you as a board can look into. It's public information, a lot of that is public information. And we're talking to the people that I'm sure the professors and the people who teach in the program. That would be something you could explore, looking at, are there differences in the curriculum? And with regard to the way tests are given, and I understand your concern about that everything's multiple choice, and that one of the reasons for that is it's a lot easier to compare, to look at data from multiple choice exam, test questions than something that's a practical or a clinical type exam. And I'm sure you know that tests have moved away from those other types of methodologies because it's just time and labor intensive to develop and to score. Not to say that with computers is, that we can't simulate it. I mean, are you drawing on computers now? Are you using computers for drawing? So that is something to ask, and I don't know anything so much specific about your program, but to ask CLARB. Why are we testing the way we're testing? Are there skills? Their occupational analysis should look at skills and knowledge. So are we testing the skills, or why aren't we testing the skills? Those are things you could ask CLARB about.
To follow up briefly.
I'm sorry, because I think it's the air is flowing. You have to talk more closely to the mic. Sorry.
To follow up briefly, when you look at that exam plan for CLARB, when you look at all the different things it's trying to test, my guess is that a small portion of them would be able to be tested by a drawing, and that may be misfocused on their side, and that I'm not certain of. But when we talk about everything that goes into these tests, it may not be that they all translate well. But as Heidi said, that would be an issue to bring to CLARB and say, we don't think that you're actually testing the skill that we think you should be testing.
Well, I think most of us older people around here took the test when drawing was the majority of the test. And to your point is, well, that's difficult to grade. And I mean, we got AI and all these other technologies now that I just think we put all our eggs into one basket because it was convenient and easier to grade. And we're in a mode right now of being diverse and inclusive. And to me, we're not changing the exam to reflect this diversity and inclusion into people that think differently or operate, you know, and really it goes to what we do as a profession. The majority of my day is spent drawing, and I don't get, people don't get tested on that anymore. So I do appreciate all this information, and I think it's been very helpful, and it kind of confirms my perspective.
And the fact that CLARB is making some big changes to the examination, that's probably reflective of their saying that things may have changed in the industry based on their research that they do through the occupational analysis. So I don't know how much you've been involved in understanding the new direction that they're going, have they? But you might invite them to come and give you a presentation and say, explain to us why the changes, and then you could ask them those questions directly.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. All right, any other, Patricia?
Yeah. So two comments. You know, when you were talking about curriculum, two things that I'd kind of like to see us track a little bit. The first one is AutoCAD. So, you know, I've been to different sessions at the ASLA conference, and I always ask the question, you know, do you have that on your curriculum? Do you teach AutoCAD? Because it's the first thing that we want, you know, a person right out of college to be able to do is to know AutoCAD. And what I found is that it's all over the place. I mean, some schools provide it, some don't. But, you know, if that was something that could be, you know, emphasized, I think it would make a dramatic difference with a lot of these students. The other thing is so many of us in this profession haphazardly find out about landscape architecture. So the one thing I'm kind of curious is how many people this is like their second degree, basically, because I'm, you know, one of those that started out in one thing and then, you know, discovered landscape architecture. So I think that could be kind of an interesting statistic as well.
Thank you. Any other questions from the committee? Okay, hearing none. I do have one question for staff. When a candidate applies for the exam, do we take any type of demographic analysis as part of that application? Okay, we don't. And as far as vetting their experience, does it go into enough detail that it really looks at specific areas of practice and how much time they actually have in that?
If a candidate uses a CLARB council record to submit their experience to us for evaluation, that goes into a fair amount more detail. If they use LATC's certification of experience form itself, it only lists the qualifying license type and the license details. So CLARB will give you more information on that if they submit their experience that way.
Okay, thank you. All right, if there's no more questions or comments, I'll ask for comments from the room. Yes?
Hi, Melissa. Hi, my name is Melissa Ruth. I'm a landscape architect practicing in California. So from what it sounds like, the data that is presented is solely based on where you went to school and only schools in California. I'm wondering, because we have so many practicing landscape architects in California, not necessarily coming from a California school, one of the things that you mentioned was the quality of work experience. And at my office, we've had people intern from out of state, and I'm just wondering if that's part of that question of the quality of their work experience and California in general. Is it not just focused on the school being potentially a concern of where that information is coming from, but us as being practicing landscape architects in California, is there something that we can learn and we're not doing enough to get these candidates ready as well?
Mm-hmm.
That's what I was going to say.
All right, thank you. Any other comments? All right, at this time, we'll open it up to our WebEx viewers. Any comments from them?
We are now accepting public comment via WebEx. If you would like to make a comment, please type the word comment into the Q&A box in the lower right-hand corner of the screen and send that comment to all participants. Dial-in users, please dial *3 to raise your hand, and we will call on people in the order we have requests. And we had a written comment from Alejandra Cervantes. We're going to give you an opportunity to speak here. I'm going to send you a request to unmute your microphone.
Can you hear me? I'm not sure.
Yes, go ahead, please.
Yeah, I think I agree with Susan and the point that was brought. We all have different learning styles, but also English is my second language, and I've always also struggled with test taking. So when taking the test, it always feels like I really have to understand the question, even if I'm comfortable with like the material and I've been practicing. So it always seems like, so going back, it was mentioned like, oh, the test probably is just like the minimal English, like to be proficient, right? Not necessarily. I think I've been around, even though English is my second language, I was born here, but it still feels like some of those questions or the language that is used is sometimes confusing, and the format it is. So, that's just my comment. So I think it would be good to look into it. Maybe, I know there's consulting. I'm not sure how it works. There are groups out there who actually have done research on how schools and programs can help and really understand that aspect of diversity, and how do you make a test equitable, maybe using different words, right? So it's like, for example, if I say the test uses hard language versus verbiage, right? There's like, some might not be it's as simple as that. So I think I do agree with Susan, and also learning styles and experiences and options that we have available going through, like, from high school to college. It's different things that each student has available. So it would be interesting to put some money into that for like research and really understand how we can either help students prepare for the test better or format the test in a way that it's more inclusive for all learning styles and, language. So that's it. It's just more of a comment rather than a question. Thank you.
All right, thank you.
And with that, there are no other requests for public comment at the moment. Do you wish to return to the agenda?
Yes, thank you. All right, I don't think there's any motion or anything on this. Again, Dr. Calvert, thank you very much. I'm sure we'll be talking again in the future. With that, I have 12:23. Why don't we take a break for lunch, and we will reconvene the meeting at 1 p.m. All right, we're calling the meeting back into order. Also, we're going to skip for right now item H3, and we're going to go to item I, presentation on American Society of Landscape Architects Diversity X Landscape Architecture Program. And I'm going to ask Melissa Ruth to come up to give that presentation.
All right, is the slide, get the slide ready? But I wanted to thank you all for having us here today. Melissa Ruth. I'm Jessie Lett.
I need to request you guys talk close to the mic, the air is blowing right here.
Absolutely. Is this better?
Yeah.
Okay. Sounds great. Okay, so it's a fairly brief presentation, but like I said, we're really appreciative of you guys listening to us. What we wanted to do is give you a little bit of kind of background on the subcommittee that we have been working on with diversity and landscape architecture. So if you want to go to the next slide, this is basically we worked on creating kind of a mission statement that we're aiming to proactively help landscape architects in our region be more educated, aware, and accomplished in achieving diversity, equity, and inclusion. So I will let you know, I'm going to let you know who we are, what we do. And so if you go to the next slide, really to help support our members, we've been kind of tasked ourselves with collecting data, understanding the diversity of our profession, and I think we all have seen these slides before, the demographics that are in our profession, how can we better achieve more diversity, both racial demographics, we've been looking at women in the profession, and obviously some of those declines that we were seeing. Not really any data yet on the LGBTQ demographics, and I think that's maybe something that we would look for that's kind of lacking. We started as actually WXLA, which is kind of more on the national level, women in landscape architecture. And as we started meeting back in 2020, had a few meetings, we realized that we really wanted to reach more of our the landscape architecture members, and actually formed DXLA to address kind of all diversity of the profession, because we felt like there's a voice that wasn't being represented. What we do, we have meetings monthly. They've been virtual. We're trying to have some in-person meetings. When we do meet, we kind of work on planning level things, ways to meet the goal. Some of the first things that we had done with the committee is set some goals that we wanted to achieve. And part of that was kind of evaluating some of the chapters, programs, and how we could bring more diversity into events or communication on the website, having some additional plans and lecture events for that. And then trying to also during the meeting have an opportunity to have discussions with groups on current events, share articles, items like that. And one of the biggest things that we've done, if you go to the next slide, is the resources. And so if you go to the Sierra Chapter ASLA website, you will see some drop-down links that goes through what DXLA is, but also a bunch of resources. And Jessamine was instrumental in developing that list. And it asked the questions, where do I start? How do I talk about this? And what are other people doing? And so we're sharing lots of resources to connect our members to issues related to diversity, equity, and inclusion. We also work on related to the hot sheet that the ASLA Sierra chapter puts out, our monthly tips. And so some of the things that we have heard or talked about in meetings, we'll present that as like a tip, so that, you know, it's always on everyone's mind. There's a little snippet of information to help you throughout the profession. I'm going to go to the next slide. Some of the events that we've been doing is included the women in the industry. So it was a topic related to women in landscape architecture and our experiences. Parenting, which was not just moms, it was moms and dads, and it was a really great discussion about navigating the profession. We did one on allyship in the workplace, environmental justice through community outreach, and then we've had a few other events like a hike, and then there was a laser tag recently. So trying to bring more activity, make it more accessible to the members. If you want to go to the next slide. Here's just an example of some of the flyers that we put out and the groups that we had part of these different panels. Like I said, on parenting, a female-led panel on women and their career paths. Next slide. And then this is the one that we had on allyship, the panelists from the LGBTQ community discussing gender inclusivity and workplace allyship. And I thought that was really interesting. And all of these are available on the website if you ever want to watch the video of those Zoom sessions. And then the most recent one was the environmental justice one, where we talked to panelists about using and incorporating the DAI initiatives into public engagement process and some of those success stories. Go to the next slide. And so these were some of the goals that we had attained, and probably part of the reason why we're talking today is, you know, we want, in general, to get more attendance at our meetings. We want to educate members on DEI issues. We want to be able to support the student chapters in resources related to DEI, provide mentorships or connections for folks for mentorships, and partnering with nonprofits where we can as well. And so I think that's generally what we have done in the past, and we've got, you know, a lot of ideas on how we can try to start bringing, you know, work with our group to bring more diversity. We know that's going to be an ongoing issue, and so we're trying to be that kind of person in between to help connect some of those dots. And
yeah, and so this was a great summary of sort of what we are doing, what we've done, and then when we talked about coming and speaking with you, we actually had a couple of sort of asks or suggestions that came up that would be things that we'd love to see happening in the profession, in like specific to licensure. And so the first one was collecting and publishing disaggregated data on race and gender regarding who's signing up to take the exam and who is passing it. And so Missy shared some of the information on that we do have on race and gender, and there's actually a fantastic report about gender, but the race data is lacking. That's from Landscape Architecture Foundation, but it's just getting access to good data is very, very difficult and really key for as a diagnostic tool and for development of goals, both for our chapter and for our profession overall. And so that's something that I feel like LATC is in a position where we could be getting some really good broad data on what landscape architects look like in California, and I'd really love to see something like that. Mm-hmm. The second thing we discussed is having LATC develop DEI-specific goals and potentially including those in their strategic plan. I know there's a statewide initiative right now for that. One of those goals that we'd really love to see, or that came to mind for us, is to see passing rates similar to sign-up rates for race-based proportions. So if 20% of people signing up are Black, 20% of people passing are Black, for example. You know, making sure that there's not some sort of bias in the testing process. And I know a lot of this is CLARB, but, you know, that would be a wonderful goal. In my opinion, I think something LATC could, you know, push or be a part of. And then the third piece is actually the sign-up process. So signing up for the exam, when I was taking it, I finished in 2019. And my friends, my cohort who I was taking it with, we kind of joked that signing up was the fifth section because it was very difficult. It's very difficult to navigate where LATC interfaces with CLARB, what comes first, what comes second. And having some of that available in other languages in particular would be huge, because even if you're practicing in English, the intricacies of signing up would be really helpful to have in a native language. Specifically, I was taking a look at the available information and the candidate tutorials. Like, what does it mean if you want to get licensed? How do you go about doing that? You know, that's something that'd be really wonderful to be offering in a couple of other languages. So those are the suggestions, the thoughts that we had about how LATC could be supporting diversity in the profession. Thank you for your consideration on that.
And if you want to go to the last slide, that's just some more examples of some of those monthly tips that we've compiled too. I'd love for you guys to check those out.
All right, thank you. And this is exactly why I asked you to come and give this presentation, is because we need to know what we can do as a committee to better support our licensees and our candidates and that type of thing. And the work that you've been doing is excellent in regards to starting to pull all that information together. And I'm hopeful that we can continue building that relationship. I know I've also talked with Stephen Chavez with the National Association of Minority Landscape Architects, and building that dialogue as well. So, and especially in areas where we can take information from groups like yours and go to CLARB and say, listen, as California representatives, we feel this is what you need to be paying attention to. And I think all the ideas that you've brought up are excellent ones. So with that, if any of the other committee members, Susan?
I want to really thank you ladies for coming. This topic is near and dear to my heart. I don't know if you know, I'm also the vice mayor of Campbell, and we have our strategic planning for that, and my whole thing is inclusiveness. And someone asked me to describe what that is. I said, it's pretty sad that you don't know what it means, and that we don't collectively know what being inclusive means. And so I really appreciate all the background and the effort that you're having monthly meetings, that you're coming here and speaking before us, so I greatly appreciate it. And I support the things that they're recommending, that we do need to keep better statistics. I mean, we have 3 women on the board, but we don't have a person of color, so we've made progress, maybe not enough. I don't know about the other categories, but I do think that this is important to embrace. And for me, it's not just a movement, it's a passion and a cause for me.
Likewise.
Pamela?
I would like to reiterate a thank you as well for all of your work and the progress that you're making for our profession. So thank you very much. And we were talking about, in line with your request, we were having some of those very conversations before you arrived. So they're conversations that we're having here. DEI has worked into our strategic plan, and we're actively having conversations. So we need to keep communicating together, and I think taking your message to the other chapters in California as well, since we have 3 other chapters in the state. I think collaboration within those chapters is great. I sit right now as president of the Southern California chapter, so you know, it's an important conversation. Patricia, are you still sitting as trustee?
Yes.
Yes, of San Diego. So you have, two people sitting on leadership positions in two of the chapters that I'm assuming would be open to more conversations. And I think that that we're stronger when there's more of us working together. So, I mean, as a big state with 4 chapters, I think there's a lot we can do working together. So I would just suggest that, give us a call.
Yeah, love that. And so just so you know, in addition to being a practicing landscape architect and being the chair for the DXLA committee, I'm also president-elect for ASL-ACR chapter right now. And I think connecting with the other chapters is something that I did a lot when I was participating more heavily in EPG, and something I think we could continue specifically with the diversity and landscape architecture and also our climate change work. I think those are the boundaries are far more than statewide.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you for your work.
Patricia?
Yes, thank you for coming and sharing. This is great information, so I hope you will, contact the other chapters so that, hopefully they can kind of put this on their website, because I know the San Diego chapter, I don't think we have anything set up yet, but definitely need to, so thank you.
Yes, and our chapters, I believe, have not an integrated website, but our websites are very similar. They've been designed by the same organization, and so that should make it pretty easy to pull like information together. And maybe this is that moment where we realize that that's there, and how to better utilize that across our chapters to bring more information and education to our licensees.
All right, any other comments, questions? All right, I'll open it up to any other comments from the room. Okay, hearing none, I will now open it up to our WebEx participants.
We are now accepting public comment via WebEx. If you would like to make a comment, please type the word comment into the Q&A box in the lower right-hand corner of the screen and send that comment to all participants. Dial-in users, please dial *3 to raise your hand, and we will call on people in the order we have requests. We're going to take a few seconds now to see if we have a request for public comment. Seeing no request for public comment, do you wish to return to the agenda?
Yes, please. Thank you. All right. Again, thank you very much, and we will be in touch.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
thank you all.
Thank you very much.
All right. We will now move back to item H3. Research the economic and consumer protection impact of reestablishing the Landscape Architects Board or establishing a merged board with the California Architects Board to provide better representation, strengthen the distinction between the two entities, and increase efficiency. And with that, I'll ask Laura Zuniga to introduce this item.
Okay, thank you. So this came out of the strategic plan session, and I know the committee members discussed it a little bit at that time. I think there's been a little bit more research. So there's background information here, obviously from prior sunsets. I would say the board hasn't, as a whole, hasn't really discussed this, so I would maybe just comment that if there is any action coming out of this meeting, perhaps then maybe the next step would be to have a discussion with the board or send it for the board agenda. But I think everyone's pretty familiar with this item, so I guess just I would open it up for comments or questions from members as to what they'd like to see here.
Mm-hmm. I guess I'll make an initial few comments. In reading the sunset report from 1996, I believe, when we lost our board. It was pretty disparaging. Although I did find a lot of contradictions in their report where on one hand they would ask us to do one thing and then they would recommend the opposite in a number of different areas. So I guess the issues that were brought up are probably the same now as they were back then. I believe that we've done a lot of positive work in those areas since that time to justify our existence. And but with that, obviously, there's always room for improvement with anything, and so I think it's time to continue that discussion on exactly what the future of this committee is going to be in regards to public protection and regulating the profession in California. So with that, I'll open it up to any discussion, questions, comments. Andy?
Well, first off, when we look at the report, it was 20-some-odd years ago, 27 years ago, whatever it was. There's been a lot of changes. It's a different world now than it was then.
Yeah.
So we have to kind of recognize that things evolve. And at the time, there was a movement even back then when we were still the State Board of Landscape Architects to do a merged board. Unfortunately, that didn't get communicated to the architects. And so that fell flat at that particular time. I happened to be the representative to the assembly when that was going to go through, or when that was going to be presented, and it got pulled right at the very last second. So it was a little disheartening at that time. But thankfully, there was a movement that started a letter writing campaign that a lot of people initiated, and that's how the Landscape Architects Technical Committee basically came about as a committee underneath the Board of Architects. So, and I think we're all very appreciative that the architects, allowed that to happen. But time has gone on, and we've grown as a profession, and we need to take a look and see if it's time for there to be another Board of Landscape Architects, separate from the Board of Architects. Now, having said that, though, I think our last presentation that we had at our last board meeting, where we had the budget review, and we started, that was a little eye-opening when you started looking at the costs involved, and suddenly we're having to charge almost double what we had been charging for a license. That then starts making this fiscally not doable maybe at this time. But that's when the concept of possibly doing a merged board, where our numbers and the architect's numbers are combined. Laura, maybe I could ask you, how many licensees are there for the architects?
It's about 23,000.
So 23,000 plus 3,600 that are licensed landscape architects. Suddenly we're, it's a larger number. And if you're looking at a licensee base, when you have, 2,700, let's say, 27,000, sorry, got to do my math right, 27,000 licensees, the cost to operate the board then maybe is spread out over fewer people, or greater number of people, so it reduces the cost per se. So I guess what I'm trying to say is one of the benefits to doing the merged board might be that rather than doubling the license fee for the landscape architects, because I think, Laura, at the last meeting it was presented that the architects might be raising their license fees to $400, was that correct? Yeah. So maybe, and our fee right now is $400, is it not? Mm-hmm. Yeah, I believe. So they're going up to 400, and we'd be going up to like 700. So if we were able to keep it closer to 400 or 500, whatever it would be, it might make that a little bit more palatable. How the landscape architects would be represented on the board of architects, I don't know. It'd be a merged board, and obviously there's public members on the architects board. And so how that would work, that would be something that a greater power than what we have would have to figure that out. But anyway, I'm just kind of throwing it out there. It's a point of discussion. Is it time for the architects or the landscape architects to step up to the board of architects as equal members? So, because right now, and this isn't taking anything away from the Board of Architects, we appreciate everything they've done for us, but everything this committee does has to be approved by the board. And sometimes it's a lengthy process. There are things that I could point to in this report that have been going on for years. And that's not putting the blame on, one group, or it's just a matter of timing. So, let's say like it's the disciplinary guidelines. That's a very lengthy process. So this body will sit there and say, yeah, okay, we approve it. And it goes to the architect, we think there should be a change. So they initiate the change. It comes back to us. We look at it again and go, oh, well, yeah, but would you consider this? And it goes back to, next thing you know, a whole year has gone by. So in my viewpoint, having been on this committee since 2007, I think maybe there's an opportunity for maybe some increased efficiencies as far as that goes in that regard. So if we can take out that one approval step, maybe that might foreshorten the approval process on some items. I'm not saying that it's the best possible situation, but it's just something that maybe we can start the conversation and see where it goes from there. Mm-hmm. Anyway, thank you very much.
Patricia?
Yeah, so I'm on the ASLA licensure committee. And so one of the things, we have monthly meetings. I just wanted to share with you. I was kind of surprised. So there's, I think it's like around 33 different states that have a blended board. So, it does look like it's a trend that's, continuing to grow. And just to kind of build on what Andy was saying, I think, the efficiency is something that we should really look at. And I would think that the state would appreciate us trying to be efficient and, fiscally responsible by, at least exploring this opportunity.
Mm-hmm. Susan?
Yes, I appreciate what my other colleagues have talked about. Two things. Power in numbers. We're a very small number. We don't have as much power. Merging with the architects would certainly put us in a bigger group. Efficiency to scale. When I'm looking at our license exam is going to cost more than an architect's license, that's kind of like, really? They have such a higher level of responsibility with structures and all that. It's unfortunate because we do have to absorb the OPEB costs and some of these other governmental costs that really make our budget untenable. I mean, I couldn't believe how much we had. We had almost doubling our fee, and architects are only going up to where we are right now. So I don't think we should be our own, because it says here it's reestablishing or establishing a merged board. I don't think at this point reestablishing our own separate board makes sense, just because of the magnitude of scale, magnitude of numbers, and efficiencies. But I would like to see us having a better seat at the table. And if that means being a board member on the architect boards, it addresses a lot of, Andy, what you were talking about of this back and forth, and they still have to approve, and then they don't. And you mentioned a year. Some of these things are years in making. So I do not support reestablishing a separate board. I would be interested in learning more about what it takes to be a merged board. what that does, both from a efficiency standpoint, a cost perspective, how it affects our license, but also what it does to the public and the perception to the public of it. Does that give us more, I don't want to say clout, but does that give us a little more prestige knowing that we are part of the larger board? But, you know, we want better representation, I think is what it comes down to, and protect the health, safety, and welfare. And I just cannot imagine us charging more for our license fee than the architects. It doesn't seem to really make sense.
Mm-hmm. Pamela?
I'd just like to say that I'm in agreement with my colleagues. I think further discussion and investigation into the merged board concept, and in agreement with, after seeing the budget information, that establish ourselves as a single board, just in light of all of that, doesn't make good fiscal sense. Now, you know, would the architects be even interested in this? I mean, there's a lot of questions, I think, to ask, conversations that need to be had with the architectural board to see if it's even something that we could pursue, because obviously they would need to be in agreement as well.
Mm-hmm.
I was just going to say, I think just from a staff perspective, I agree with what Andy's saying. I mean, they're definitely, I think that we've made the system work well, but there are inefficiencies from having duplicate public meetings and having things go through, you know, both LATC and the board for approval, like you said, just in terms of like even like setting a meeting, creating the agenda, you know, staffing, all that. So, I mean, there are definitely efficiencies that could be seen, and I think both the board and LATC, we pay pro rata for the department. If we're a combined board, maybe that is different. We can certainly look at that. As you said, most other states don't. I don't know that there's another state that has a structure like we do. A lot of them do have the combined boards, or they have multiple professions. There aren't that many standalone architects boards either, because in most states the numbers just don't support that. It's a combination. Some things to consider would be like, yeah, what would the structure of the merged board look like? What would the landscape architect representation be compared to the architects? Then you have public members, which LATC doesn't experience now. So things to consider. So I guess maybe the next step would be a discussion. Maybe I know that John, you and Trish and I had a conversation with Tian when he was president of the board, and now it's Sunny Ward. So maybe one more conversation, or a conversation with Sunny, and maybe putting it on the May board agenda, if that's what the committee's interested in.
Yeah, I guess my initial thoughts on this is looking at what our meetings typically are. I mean, they pretty much run a day based on the issues that we're dealing with, and I know that there would be some overlap in regards to some of that, but there are a number of issues that are unique to us that we typically deal with, and how that would be incorporated into the structure with the architects. It's almost like there would be a 2-day meeting, and the first meeting would focus on the architects, and the second day would focus on the landscape architecture issues or whatever. So I think that, you know, from a logistical standpoint, that's going to have to be a big part of this discussion, is how do we maintain some separation in our interests versus the architecture interests, because a merged board, I think, would focus primarily on sort of the administration of this rather than the specific issues that we would both be dealing with, and I guess that's, you know, that's the part that would really have to be worked out, and how does the board composition represent those interests. So I think probably the best way to to address that question is just to all sit down and just start talking about this. And because I'd really be interested in hearing what the architects board members, what their thoughts are on this, because I think obviously are looking at what's going on in other states and talking with their contemporaries and everything, and hearing the horror stories and everything about how these joint boards typically end up operating. But I'm open to any dialogue that we can start in that regard. So.
We should also keep in mind that, for years we've been aligning ourselves with the CAB. We've made adjustments to, a lot of the policies that we have in place. So I think that needs to be mentioned as well.
Mm-hmm. Andy?
Well, I think also, too, I think just about each one of us on the committee at one time or another have been a representative to the CAB meetings. So we've all experienced what a CAB meeting is and what the information it is that is presented, or the issues that they go through. And to me, it seems like their meetings and our meetings are very, very similar in as far as talking about pass rates, talking about schools, talking about pieces of legislation that come up. I mean, there's so many similarities that it just seems to me that possibly if we were a merged board, we could be a little bit more efficient with everybody's time from that standpoint. I do agree with you, though, John. I think that it's going to be, it's going to be an adjustment trying to figure out how that would work as far as time. Does the morning time frame go to the architecture, specific items, and the afternoon goes to the more the landscape architecture specific items? I don't know. I don't have those kind of answers. But again, I mean, that maybe be staff level. They can, kind of help figure that out. And again, maybe some research as to how other boards are working when it comes to merged boards. Mm-hmm. Arizona might be the best one to look at for us, only just because they're, adjacent state. But I think their architects, landscape architects, civil engineer, and land surveyors, I think there's 4 boards or 4 professions that are covered under their board. There may even be a 5th profession. Mm-hmm. So it'd be interesting to see how they handle with 4 and versus with 2. I like I said, I can't answer that. I don't have, the knowledge base to be able to know how they work it. But like you, I'd be interested to explore this a little bit more.
Mm-hmm. All right. Any other questions, comments? Susan?
What said, action requested, discuss, which we are discuss, and determine next steps. So I would guess the next step would be to have maybe John, you and Laura meet with the architect board and broach the subject and talk, we've mentioned some logistics here. But so I would recommend that John and Laura and whoever else meet with the architect board, and then hopefully by our August meeting that there's a report back of kind of here's, if you did it, here's what would need to happen, here's how long it would take, and how would meetings operate, how would we be also still have a subcommittee under the main board. So I would recommend that move forward that way.
Right. I guess a question for Laura is, I'm assuming that if we were to technically we are part of the CAB, so it would be the CAB basically having to.
Yeah, I guess it would be make more of a change to the board than it is to LATC, but that is, like you mentioned, one of the options or one of the things to consider is, how to maintain the landscape architect voice is. The board right now has a couple committees underneath it, and one of them is professional qualifications, which deals with licensing, and one is regulatory enforcement. I mean, there's the possibility, like maybe there is a truly advisory, like landscape architect committee that is more talking about like the issues that are going to be specific to landscape architects, but where you wouldn't deal with all the sorts of, you wouldn't be necessarily like approving regulations and doing all that, but maybe just to dive into those issues a little bit more deeply than is done at the board level.
Right. And I'm assuming that this would take a legislative or a statutory change.
It would,
correct?
yeah. So as we're going through sunset next year, it's a good time for it. So it's good to have these discussions this year and see if they want to go forward with it, because we'd be prepared.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, well, I guess the question is, do we make a motion to, and what will that be in regards to moving forward with this discussion?
I'm not sure you need a motion right now, if we're just going to have a conversation. Yeah, okay, so.
Ask him.
If staff is just going to be getting you information, there's not a need for a motion on that. That's not actual action being taken, but.
So I guess at this point then, we can just work informally, and we can meet with Sunny and Ron as well, and just start that dialogue and see where it goes from there. And if there's specific things that we need staff to help with, that we can direct them just based on those conversations. If that's acceptable to everybody.
Yeah, I'd make one request. If you do come back in August, you mentioned that how many other states have combined, just a little bit of what other states are doing, because that could be a roadmap.
Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think we would probably want to look specifically if any of those boards are just strictly architects and landscape architects versus the engineers and surveyors and whoever else. Yeah. All right. If there's no more comments or questions or anything, I'll open it up to any from the room. I only hear crickets anyway. Okay. We'll open it up to any comments from our WebEx participants.
We have more than a dozen on this side, so we are now accepting public comment via WebEx. If you would like to make a comment, please type the word comment into the Q&A box in the lower right-hand corner of the screen and send that comment to all participants. Dial-in users, please dial *3 to raise your hand, and we will call on people in the order we have requests. We're going to take a few seconds now to see if we have a request for public comment. And our first request comes from Tracy Morgan Hollinsworth. Hold on just a moment. We're going to send you a request to unmute your microphone.
About why landscape architects don't have a seat at the CAB's table. So my comment that I threw in here, and I think it went to you, the moderator, was should CAB add seats allocated for landscape architect representation as a first step? And I think that's probably something you'll be asking John when you do talk with him. So good conversation. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. It'll probably be picked up on the recording, and I can call Tracy and ask her what.
And that appears to be the entirety of our requests at the moment.
All right. You can close that then. Thank you. All right, we'll move to item J, review of future committee meeting dates. It looks like the next meeting on the list here is the CAB meeting on May 19th. It'll be a virtual meeting. I'll plan on attending that one. The next LATC meeting will be on August 11th to be determined. I'm assuming because we met up north here that we'll probably hold it down south somewhere. We'll figure that out. And then September 8th board meeting. The next CLARB annual meeting will be September 20th to the 22nd, and I'm sure we'll have plenty to share with them. The ASLA annual conference in Minneapolis in the end of October. And then November 3rd will be our last meeting of the year. It'll probably to be determined, but that will also be the meeting that we'll be voting on the new chair and vice chair. So get ready, Pamela. And then, of course, the last board meeting of the year, December 1st. Any questions or comments or
John,
anything on that? Yes,
I
Susan?
have not formally made my application for renewal. There was some delay with the Speaker of the Assembly, and then my delay. I'm turning it in on Monday or Tuesday. Anthony Rosen, I think it's Rosen, the Speaker of the Assembly, is termed out in June. So I'm hoping that my application will get approved here in May or June before he leaves. Otherwise, I'd have to start over again.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And John? I'm not sure, maybe this is a question for Laura, if there's anybody in the queue for appointments, gubernatorial appointments, but this potentially could be my last meeting, depending upon if the governor appoints somebody else during my my grace year, my grace period.
You're just entering into your grace period, right?
I will at the end of May.
They don't necessarily tell us if they have anyone in the pipeline, but I'll see what I can find out.
I've heard through the rumor mill that there's potentially one person.
Okay.
But I don't know where they are in the process, so I just wanted to say to you and the staff, thank you very much. If this ends up being my last meeting, thank you all very much. It's been wonderful since 2007. It's been a long time. Excuse me. It's been a long time on this committee, so I just wanted to say thank you very much. Hopefully this isn't my last meeting, but you never know how these go. That's actually how I got on the committee, is I took somebody else's spot, and he didn't know that he was being replaced until finally somebody said, sorry, you're gone. So anyway, but thank you all very much. I appreciate it.
And Randy, or Andy, you're greatly appreciated. And I guess I should maybe say goodbye, just in case. I'm hopeful, though.
Okay. So I will open it now to any comments from the room. Hearing none, we'll ask one last time for comments from our WebEx participants.
We are open for comments from WebEx. If you would like to make a comment, please type the word comment into the Q&A box in the lower right-hand corner of the screen and send that comment to all participants. Dial-in users, please dial *3 to raise your hand, and we will call on people in the order we have requests. And our first request comes from Tracy Morgan Hollandworth. Hold on just a moment, please.
There are two applicants from San Diego to LATC for the governor's appointments. So both of them are Armstrongs. There's a Marty Armstrong and a Phil Armstrong, and I let Trish know before she left, just in case. That's it.
Thank you.
John, I have a comment.
Yes.
So just to, be transparent here, I thought I was termed out, and I had the governor's office call me and tell me that I wasn't. So I just resubmitted like last week.
Mm-hmm. Noted, and we'll just see how it plays out. So.
Yeah, John, it's very possible that it's just you and Pamela at the next meeting. And so just want to let you know, you can arm wrestle to see who's going to be chair and vice chair at your November meeting. So
There are no other requests for public comment via WebEx.
Our
Would you
plan to
like
take over
return
the
to
world is
agenda?
working, John.
All right, I guess if there's no further comments from our WebEx
None.
participants, we can close that. I want to thank everybody for being here today. I think it was a very productive meeting. Again, thank you very much to our staff. You guys are doing a great job, and look forward to the next meeting and see who the heck shows up. With that, we're done.
I would say 5. Yeah. I'm going to leave this here. Yep, that's fine.